Hello and welcome in. Today's topic is something that's for some reason hotly debated and controversial, and the title is slightly clickbaity, but urethane the cover stock does not create carrydown, but urethane balls can and do most of the time. It's very simply and logically explained, so we're going to clear up the confusion. We're going to talk about carrydown, what causes it, how you can avoid it, how you can deal with it, how you can even make it work to your advantage, and several smaller points around it. Now, small monologue / disclaimer here to cover some bases before we get into it. Yes, I have an outline that I'm going to be reading from occasionally, but I think you'd prefer to have someone prepared for what they're talking about rather than just shooting from the hip and rambling to make it sound more natural or to save themselves some time on editing or something. Now, I have my points and notes to work from, but I'll expand on them as we go rather than just kind of dry reading from a script like I'm doing right now. This one needs a little bit more care though, so it'll definitely be more structured because I want to make sure that I say exactly what I want to say, because explaining it clearly is a little tricky. Also, please note my sponsors and other resources I have linked in the description, things to help both you and me and make this whole bowling thing work for all of us. Okay, so this for some reason has been one of the things that stuck with bowlers for years and years and causes a lot of confusion for both newbies and decades-long vets. I mentioned it in videos for years, but it needed its own video. Urethane does not cause carrydown. I'll say that again so that everybody can hear me clearly. Urethane does not cause carrydown. The reason that urethane has historically gotten blamed for carrydown is that traditional urethane balls had very weak cores in them, which didn't flare or flared very little, like the Purple Hammer, Black Hammer, Pitch Black to a certain extent. Matter of fact, one of the measures of being a good or accurate bowler 30 or 40 years ago was having a track the size of a dime or smaller. Back when bowling balls didn't flare, only one small part of the ball would ever touch the lane, and wood lanes would create wear in that area. So bowling balls would develop worn, kind of lightly scratched tracks the same way that it looks on like those Visiballs that the college kids have. So using my incredibly awesome drawing skills, bowling ball, finger holes, and because most of you are right-handed, basically what it would look like on a ball that didn't flare, and I had like a urethane, one of my first balls when I started taking it seriously, was a Columbia Tie Beast urethane ball. Didn't really do much, and we had, everybody over 40 will remember this, or people that have bowled on wood lanes. You would get kind of like this, you'd get like these scratches. So your track area, instead of having the lines, you would have like these scratches in the track area like that. And it even happens to some certain extent on synthetic lanes, but not quite as bad. It's really funny to see the spare balls that the college kids have that have the painted on logos of like their schools or whatever. And a lot of them, if they use it for long enough, it has that white ring around it where the track is. Those balls are plastic and they don't flare. And so you'll just have that ring of white around the ball. Now, the more consistently you release the ball, that's the smaller that track's going to be. A ball that doesn't flare, like those plastic balls, have just one ring of oil on it all the way down the lane, and naturally when it hits the dry lane on the back end, all of the oil on the ball gets put back down on the lane because it's just rolling over that one point the entire way down the lane. For urethane, this is great. You want the ball reaction to be early and smooth so that the dry ball gets traction on the first few rotations when it hits the lane, and then the oil that gets on the ball slows the traction down. Plus, as you build up some carry down, you get an even smoother and more controllable ball reaction that lets you keep your angles more direct and gives you consistency. For reactive balls, this doesn't work because they operate completely different than urethane. They're designed to glide down the lane and then turn more sharply into the pins. And since reactives are much more responsive to friction and much weaker in oil, carry down isn't good for them, so they're designed to flare. Flare is a controlled wobble from the core. That's why you see all the different shapes, and we have symmetric, asymmetric, because how much a ball flares is part of creating the ball reaction. A ball that flares slowly and gradually reorients the ball on every rotation. So that's why when you get a reactive ball back out of the return, it has several rings of oil on it. So instead of having this thing, or, just the one, so you'll see that when you get plastic balls back, you'll just have the one streak of oil there. On balls that flare, you'll have several. So once you get a reactive ball back out of the return that flares, you'll have several different rings of oil on it. So again, a ball that flares slowly and gradually, I know I'm repeating this, but just to reinforce, a ball that flares slowly and gradually reorients the ball on every rotation. That's why when you get a reactive ball back, it has several different rings of oil on it. So instead of a traditional urethane ball that rolls over the same track all the way down the lane, traditional non-flaring urethane, a ball that flares exposes fresh cover to the lane on every rotation so that it can continue to get traction through the oil and then have dry ball on dry lane on the back end for a sharper move down lane. So what got lost in translation. So what got lost in translation, I can't even read you guys wouldn't believe how long it takes me to record ball videos sometimes. What got lost in translation is that people a few decades ago knew what they meant when they said that urethane created carrydown, because urethane balls back then didn't flare, but reactive balls did. Now we have urethane balls that flare, like IQ78, Black Widow urethane, Hot Cell, so on and so forth. So somehow people got the idea that the urethane cover by itself was the element that caused carrydown, because people used to say, well, urethane causes carrydown, but urethane didn't flare, and so yes, urethane caused carrydown because urethane didn't used to flare. Now that it flares, somehow people got the idea that the urethane coverstock by itself was the element that caused carrydown, and ever since, people for some reason are just stuck on that idea. Now I also need to, before we go any further, I need to bat down a few responses that inevitably follow whenever I say that. First is explaining that flare is the one single factor in causing carrydown, because if the part of the ball that has the oil on it never touches the lane again, how can it cause carrydown no matter what the cover is? So you have my diagram right here. So the ball continues to do this. This is the controlled wobble from the core that makes the ball constantly have, every single time it rotates, fresh ball is touching the lane. So it continues to do this all 60 feet until it hits the pins. So if this is happening, how can the oil ever get back on the lane when fresh ball or fresh cover is touching the lane every single time it rotates? It can't put oil back down on the lane if the part of the ball with the oil on it never touches the lane again. Simple logic. Now people will still say, well, urethane balls don't absorb oil, and so reactive balls do, and think that's the explanation, but it's not, because if reactive balls absorbed oil so fast that the ball was dry by the time it hit the back end, you'd never have oil on the ball when it gets back out of the return, and we wouldn't need towels or chamois. USBC actually has a spec on speed of oil absorption. Balls can't absorb oil any faster than, I don't know what the amount is, but they can't absorb it any faster, that specific amount of oil, than like 2 minutes and 40 seconds. And either way, a ball isn't going to absorb oil in the millisecond that it takes to make a full rotation as it spins down the wane. Seriously. A ball isn't going to absorb oil in the millisecond that it takes to make a full rotation as it spins all the way down the lane, especially when people have 500 plus rev rates now. The biggest problem bowlers have is that they don't stop and critically think about these things. It'd solve so many problems that people would just apply some basic logic. Now, one caveat here is the amount of flare. Something like an IQ that has a lower differential flares, but it doesn't flare much. So we have another thing here. As the core slowly reorients and you get the oil rings, those rings overlap or cross on the top and the bottom of the ball, what is called the bow tie. So imagine this is the top of the ball. You have your flare lines. So something that flares a bunch is going to have a bunch of separation between these lines. Something that flares, so you've all seen these pictures. And so this is the bow tie, because it looks like a bow tie. So when you have something that flares a lot, that bow tie is going to be very, very small. And so every single ball will put just little tiny little dots of ridiculously small, microscopic amount of oil on the back end. However, if you have something, again, like an IQ that flares very little, you're going to have these oil rings are going to look more like this. So that bow tie, it doesn't make a huge difference, but that bow tie is going to be significantly longer. If a ball that flares more, the bow tie is going to be very, very small and compact. If it flares less, the bow tie is going to be longer. The less the ball flares, the longer those bow ties are going to be. And while it's an exceptionally small amount, there is still technically some carry down caused by everything, a reactive or urethane, because the ball will touch the lane. The part of the ball with oil on it will touch the lane at the bow tie. Now with higher flaring reactive balls, like I said, it's so small that it's virtually insignificant. Now with lower or non-flaring balls like plastic and traditional urethane, they create long, heavy streaks of carry down. And if you put a reactive cover on a non-flaring ball, the same thing's going to happen. The cover itself has nothing to do with carry down. Now a concept that does apply here though is pattern elongation, because some people will say, well, I don't care what you say, that ball is still creating carry down because my ball is hooking less on the back end. But you're not, with pattern elongation, you're not necessarily creating carry down. Carry down is typically defined as oil placed back down on the lane by the ball throughout the length of the back end area. Pattern elongation, or what people typically refer to as the back end settling down, is basically due to the fact that you have oil on the lane, you're throwing balls repeatedly down the lane, so while they're picking oil up, they're also pushing it in the direction that the ball is traveling. So if you put some oil or water on the countertop or something, and you take a ball or really any item and just kind of drag it through that puddle, you're going to get some on the item, but you're also going to create streaks of it outside of that puddle in the direction that you're dragging the item. So after ball after ball after ball goes down the lane, on the back end, again, lane, arrows, tracer boards, let's just call the pattern ends at that line. So you've got oil all throughout there. So if you keep throwing balls right there through there, at the same place in the back end, the ball is going to keep picking oil up, but it's also going to gradually kind of push the oil in that direction. That's why a lot of the times they say that you don't want to start too deep on tougher patterns, because it's already a flatter pattern, and if you start too deep, you're like pushing oil kind of towards the right side of the lane and making it even tougher. It may not sound like a lot, but if you have a 40-foot pattern and you continue to throw balls at the same break point, ball after ball after ball is going to drag that oil a little bit longer, a little bit longer, a little bit longer. Now this isn't creating carry down. This isn't carry down, but the pattern is going to feel a little longer, or the back end reaction is going to get a little slower or smoother because repeated shots have basically extended or elongated the pattern. So again, I think I said this earlier, but this is basically what people will call the back end settling down. So normally when you start throwing a few shots and the ball is just screaming out the back end, but generally it kind of slows down or rounds out. This is why you might start leaving flat corners or whatever else. But just because urethane is being thrown and you leave a flat corner because the ball goes a little long, that's not carry down. The same thing happens with reactive balls. Carry down is, again, when you have a ball that does not flare, one ring of oil, it's going to keep rolling over that one ring of oil the entire way down the lane, and it's going to create carry down. Instead of just dragging the oil a little bit longer past the end of that pattern, it's going to deposit oil, all the way down the lane. This is carry down. This is not. This is pattern elongation. This is carry down. Now, as far as actual carry down goes, I constantly get people asking me what balls are the best at digging through it. The answer is that there's nothing out there that truly digs through carry down, because it takes a shockingly small amount of oil to make even the strongest balls skid. Stronger, more dynamic balls are better at it than others, but the vast majority of the time, the most successful strategy for dealing with carry down is to treat it like hold and not try to dig through it. When ball reaction is inconsistent or sensitive, playing more lane or trying to make the ball hook more is the last thing that you want to do. The more lane you play, or the more boards you cover. So if you play, instead of, straighter is greater, playing up here, if you're playing out here and covering a lot more boards, when they're tough or tricky, the slower you throw it, the more boards you cover, the more chance you give the lane to influence the ball reaction one way or another. And when they're tough or tricky, the lane or lane conditions influence is going to be negative the vast majority of the time. Straighter is greater, again, is a saying for a reason. Now, hopefully you understand better how all this works now, and you can go argue with the mouth breathers so that I don't have to anymore. Don't be a typical bowler and just get upset when somebody says something that doesn't quite register with you. Stop and think, make it make sense. Remember to take a look at everything in the description. Thanks for watching, and may the strikes be with you.